red, white, and blue.
Slipping in our global competitiveness as a nation. It's the same crisis that they've been cooking for a long time. And I found it interesting, and I wanted to share a study that Cato Institute had done from February of 2011 that kind of dispelled some of that. They used student performance trends data from 1971 through 2008 that came from the NAEP assessment piece, and they found that the average math scores from 1971 through 2008 increased by 3.4%, while the reading scores only improved by 1% in that period of time. However, the federal education dollars that have been spent for education during that same period of time increased by 375%. And I wanted to show a graph, and I'm going to show it up to the camera just very briefly. I know you won't be able to see it very well. Essentially, these little lines at the bottom represent the reading and math and science scores. They're kind of a flat line at the bottom.
Barely going up.
But this blue line you see just skyrocketing over here is the federal education dollars. And so what that causes you to question is, this is the same kind of education reform package, the standardization and the high stakes testing that we've seen coming before. So far, to date, there's been no improvement in the educational achievement, and it's just massive amounts of money, and so you have to wonder, it isn't about money.
Well, I just want to say one thing. You know, when you take a look at, and a lot of studies have been done about how much you spend on a student, does not mean how well educated he gets.
Right.
And when I started to look at some of the numbers that Senator Thane put out, and they compared Massachusetts to our state here, they're spending $138,000 to $128,000 per student. We're spending $64,000 to $62,000, and there wasn't that much difference in the overall scores. And that's what I don't see why they're trying to change a system here that appears to be working. Yes, it needs improvement, but why are they trying to change it?
Because it's not about education. It's really not about educating the students. This is about data collection and building a workforce. This is more about workforce training and making your kids a widget in the machine. Has very little to do with actually educating your students.
And kind of integrating, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that's why they call it common and standard.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Interesting. I was just thinking they're integrating that kind of workforce standard right in the K through 12. It's almost like they've never been able to penetrate that, right? You know, when I think about community colleges and state schools and private schools, there are different types of vocational orientations in them, right? Different kinds of vocational programs.
Right.
But there's never really been a true one in K through 12.
Right, and they've kind of backed into this program from the college level. So it is it's not really designed to be a growth program at all for education.
Wow.
What do you think the families here really need to know about this Common Core? Are they better off going to teach their children themselves and homeschool? Because I see that happening a lot up north.
Yeah.
It's happening all over. In fact, we have pulled our children home. They need to understand about the standards themselves. As far as the English language arts, in the younger elementary years, they start off with 50% literature and 50% informational reading. By the time a child graduates from high school, that will be 30% literature and 70% nonfiction reading. So it completely takes that aspect out, and it is in the fiction that children learn about their culture. They learn about empathy. They understand history better, and it's also through fiction that they learn critical thinking skills, because fiction doesn't give you the whole picture. You have to read and infer and develop your critical thinking skills, whereas an informational text gives you, A, B, C, and D. It gives you all of the information. You don't have to infer anything out of what you're reading. Now, as far as the math, there are a lot of holes in it, things that they've left out, but also the highest you can get in Common Core math and in Common Core math track is Algebra 2. They don't go any further than that. So that sort of, it takes kids out of the STEM careers. If you want to go into a STEM career, you have to have at least calculus in high school, and that's no longer an option in Common Core.
And STEM being,
It makes it almost impossible for them to achieve that. The science, technology, engineering, and math, that's STEM.
Right.
But I don't understand, so they keep talking about how they can gain all of these college credits while they're in high school. What are they going to give them these college credits in?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
how they could connect that.
You keep hearing about the college credits that they're going to give students in high school, and that's a nice idea. However, it doesn't work with Common Core.
Well, that was my question. I mean, how can they...
They can't. It doesn't work. There are a lot of people who have failed to go back and look at Common Core and the things, the documents we've signed, the agreements we've entered into, and they don't realize that we're working within a framework that the federal government has set up for us. They think they can work outside that framework and add these college credits. That's not a possibility.
Yeah, I think it's a little early. Idaho's a little early in the implementation to really have a good feel for the ramifications of a lot of this. It isn't, all the pieces haven't come together yet, and that would be one of them.
And you know, when I think of fiction, one of the things that a reader is supposed to do is make a judgment about things that happen, right? The moral of the story. I mean, that's one. That's
between good and evil.
Sure, and they're forced to have to take ownership and responsibility over what they think is right or wrong, and then talk to their parents about it. But the point is, if you get rid of that and you make it, I mean, what's informational text? I mean, the things I've heard include various types of regulations, kind of, I mean, things like, say, an environmental regulation.
Yeah.
I can't find the morality out of
Manuals
or a technical
we've even heard
manual. Okay.
executive orders, bank agreements. I mean, it's just filler.
And you know, not only, you know, they take the literature out, they take the joy of reading out. If you're reading,
Yes.
you know, and I've done a lot of this in the last 2 years, documents in that, it's not fun. And what child is going to want to continue reading?
Right.
If what they're reading isn't enjoyable?
The big
that's
part
right.
of this, I think, one of the worst losses in all of this is that it's not fun for kids anymore. The school is a grind these days with the Common Core. We're hearing that more and more.
Well, I'm hearing this from a lot of the kids. I mean, even the gentleman here tonight, that's our tech, who's in the 12th grade, says it just is not any fun anymore.
Right, right.
Well, I know school isn't always supposed to be fun, but...
Learning is supposed to be enjoyable.
Yeah, but it's not supposed to be a tragedy like what's coming out here.
Well, kids are supposed to have some inspiration for wanting to learn and make something of themselves in life.
right.
And you learn a lot of that through your educational experience. You learn a lot of it at home, of course, but it should carry over into the educational environment where you're inspired to be independent.
It's a higher level of joy, not just happiness as in, you know, get a new puppy or something like that, the kid is happy, but it's a higher level. But I mean, but there's a certain satisfaction coming from that. There's a certain sense, I think, of achievement coming from that. If you can write some piece of fiction on your own and come up with some interesting characters or what have you. I mean, that imagination
just makes it all a grind, I think.
Valarie, could you tell us something about this new testing, this SBAC test, and why we don't want it here in the state?
Yeah, it certainly lost its popularity among some legislators.
Well,
keeps going.
The SBAC testing is referred to as the control arm, the enforcement arm for the standards, in that it is the ultimate measurement of whether or not the teachers are teaching according to the standards and the students are achieving according to the standards. It really drives the curriculum. I guess that's part of the problem with it, is that it's more standardized testing, more high-stakes testing. It kind of drives the curriculum. But the other part about SBAC in particular, and we didn't really talk about the origin of the two consortia, and I think we need to probably talk about that. It's illegal for the federal government to have one national testing program for all students. And so what they did to circumvent that law was that they set up two consortiums of states, and they federally funded them through the stimulus program to make essentially identical tests, so that we are still legal because we have two identical tests instead of one. But the agreement that the SBAC consortium, and probably PARC too, Idaho belongs to the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. They have an agreement with the federal government that they will provide provide student level data available, or make student level data available on an ongoing basis with the feds. And that's probably the part that's most disturbing about the test itself. The teachers don't like it because it's confining for them and their evaluations are going to be based on it. But probably one of the biggest complaints from parents is that the data collection aspects of it require student level data to be shared.
And as you read through our agreements, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. The state of Washington, which is the lead state for the testing consortium, they have an agreement with the Federal Department of Education. And then there's a governance document for Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. You read those 3 documents and they all 3 mention psychometric data. Psychometric data is used often in the business and corporate world. It tests attributes and personality traits and where will you fit in a corporate structure. And our children are going to be taking these from a very young age. We were talking about workforce earlier and how this is workforce training.
Exactly.
They are going to start funneling our children at a very young age into, you are good at math, you need to do this. You have an aptitude towards art, you need to do this. And I've heard it as young as 3rd grade. I've read it as old as 8th grade.
Right.
And like Valarie mentioned, our agreement with SBAC, you read it and it leaves the door open. It doesn't say we're giving data to the federal government, but it says that the federal government can have access to it any time they want.
And that's the other thing, that's the other aspect, is that with regard to student database, it's also illegal for the federal government to have a national student database. And so just like they did with the testing consortiums, they have basically gone in and had the states develop identical database systems and then established a means by which they can enter into agreements to share that data across states and with the feds. So they say it's not a federal program, but it's...
Most of the data I've read, I read an article about New York State. They did their first SBAC testing about, 6 months ago or so. Only 30% of the students passed the test. Not only that, but the amount of money they were paying to administer these tests was just outrageous. I always say follow the money. If you follow the money, you'll find out why somebody's doing something, and somebody's getting rich doing it.
Right. There's a massive captive market being established here.
And now, 2 names I need to bring up. One is Bill Gates, and the other is Pearson Company.
Right.
All right. Can you tell us how they're involved in this?
Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are not the only ones who are paying or investing in this program, but they're certainly the biggest of all of them. In this year, in the last few years alone, they've invested $175 million into Common Core specific items. But we've traced back even prior to that as much as $300 million that was invested through Achieve Inc., which are the ones that actually wrote the standards. Jeb Bush's organization, Foundation for Excellence in Education, Fordham Institute, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for Advocacy, the unions, the NEA, the AFT, even the PTA. They've all received money for advocacy. And so he's really left no stone unturned in terms of his coverage of all aspects. Most notable, though, and I think people need to understand that he has been financing the Council of Chief State School Officers and the National Governors Association from way back. The National Governors Association has received $26 million, and it really started with, and I wanted to make a note of this, it really started with, I think back in 2005, and the objective was to increase college readiness graduation rates. So the theme was there already at that time. Bill Gates has been involved in education for a long, long time. Now the Superintendent Luna's organization, the Council of Chief State School Officers, those are the 2 organizations that are the owners of the standards. But the CCSSO has received $80 million from the Gates Foundation. And theirs really started back in 2004 with work with the National Education Data Partnership to promote transparency and accessibility of education data. So this has just moved forward from there, but it really has always been about access to data. And for Bill Gates, he has personally, just recently, invested another $16 million to a startup organization, database management company called In Bloom. I think he and Rupert Murdoch were in partnership on that, and I think it was seed money to start. It's another 501c3 organization. But so you have the data, the big data market being driven by Gates and others, because there is big money in that. But the other thing is that it's a complete turnover of curriculum, a complete turnover of digital lessons. It creates a market for Pearson. Pearson is the largest in the world in
educational books.
Education books.
Yep.
Pearson has actually purchased many of the publishers of educational material, but they allow the publishers to keep their original names.
Yeah, they bought 11 of them in the
That's
last
right.
10 years.
Yes.
Thompson, Wadsworth,
Right.
there's
Prentice Hall,
Southwestern.
sure.
Penguin even.
Really? They bought
Yes,
Penguin?
some of those.
Amazing.
And what's
Cengage, yeah.
interesting, in the last week or two, it's come out that Bill Gates and Pearson came together to develop online curriculum for Common Core, specifically tailored to that. So right now they've got a monopoly on that. This is what this is all geared towards. This is the education industrial complex. There is big money to be made in education, and if you can use the federal government to gear, education policy towards your product.
Yep.
Well, it's
By
all
definitely a
means,
captive
right.
market.
Yeah, and it's definitely a money-making situation, and they're using our kids to do it.
And there's fewer and fewer players in that growing
Right.
market. So, yeah, it's a lot about money, for sure.
Interesting.
Also, if you look at, many of the schools use things like Parent Web or Power School and that. You look down at the bottom corner and that's Pearson. So they're part of the, a big portion of the data collecting. In Idaho, we're using SchoolNet. That's owned by Pearson.
That's funded largely by donations from Albertsons Foundation.
Albertsons Foundation.
Yeah, I noticed that the last time there was a donation.
Yeah, they're pretty heavy into promoting Common Core and online learning and digital everything.
It's an interesting approach, how they go in with the front, if you will, front organizations. I mean, it sounds like that's what we're hearing over and over again, are all these different front groups,
Right.
if you will, that are kind of leading them.
Where do you see this going? I mean, do you see us being able to stop this Common Core legislatively? Because you don't need an act from the governor. This has to go through both legislative bodies, and they have to say, let's stop it or let's hold it up. Because that's happened in, 17 or 18 states right now.
Yeah, in fact, out of the 45 who originally signed on to Common Core, there's actually resistance movements going on in about 30 of them.
That's a lot.
But in as many as 12 or 15 now, I think, there actually has reached the legislative level where they've got movement in the state houses. Idaho's at a disadvantage because not only has Tom Luna been and from the beginning, and he has a vested political interest in seeing this succeed, but also the two committee chairmen of the House and Senate Education Committees are vocal supporters.
Very vocal.
And so because it's education, you're forced to go through the committees, and the chances of us getting anything meaningful done through the committees has been a real challenge.
Right.
We're disappointed that we weren't able to get any movement on getting out of the SBAC testing at least. We believe that we might have some success with the data privacy bill, working through Getty's present.
So basically, we're not going to have any movement in the legislature until after we get a new group of people in there, especially in the constitutional offices.
Most likely.
Most likely. We need to really move forward on getting the right people elected and into those positions. That's what's going to do it for us at this point, we think.
Have you guys been out there campaigning?
No, not yet. Been a little busy.
Just kind of curious, because I know we're out there. I'd kind of like to talk to you a little bit about Dr. Sandra Stotsky and James Milgram, because these were two people who were on the validation committee but refused to sign off on it. Why is that?
You want to start with that?
Why didn't they sign off on it? Because, to quote Sandra Stotsky, they were empty skill sets. She is a nationally known English language arts expert. And she read through them and she says, these are empty skill sets, there's nothing in this. James Milgram looked at the math standards, and he was the only mathematician on this validation committee, and he looked at them and he recognized that they're only going to get to Algebra 2. And they both looked at them and realized these standards aren't really up to par. They aren't what our kids need. So they didn't sign off on them. But that didn't get into the final report. So very few people knew that.
Right. I think that the dissenting opinions, there were 5 committee members out of about 25, I think, that actually dissented and refused to sign off.
That's quite a large number.
Just 2. That's a pretty good percentage of the committee. That's only 2 of them, Milgram and
Right.
Stotsky. But it's interesting that in the final report that kind of summed up the whole process, Zev Warman, who was here with us in July, explained that there were about 10,000 comments received overall in response to the draft standards, and that the final report only had like 3 pages. So you know that a lot of it was expunged. They wanted to produce the result they want people to see.
So let me ask, who's really getting paid? Somebody's got to be making money here in the state to keep trying to force this through.
In the state?
Yeah.
In the state? I don't know.
I always say follow the money. If we find out somebody's getting money, we know where it started.
We don't know that anybody in the state has gotten money. We do know that Tom Luna was the president of the CCSSO. And it made him important. Let's and somebody from Idaho gets this prestigious position in a national trade organization. He's going to push whatever they tell him to push.
Well, you have to wonder too, I mean, speaking of the money, really, the CCSSO having received $80 million over the course of several years, where is the allegiance really? Is it back home with the taxpayers?
Right.
Or is it with those that are actually paying the bills and feeding it? Because they've given them grants just for operating money.
Well, it appears like he's got himself out of a job now. So where does he go to work next?
I'm not sure. There's debates about that.
Well, and the other is, I mean, now that he's not going to run for re-election, he could really drive on Common Core and make that his final stand, because he doesn't have to go in front of the voters. So in a sense, he becomes, if you will, from a political standpoint, anyone who's not running for re-election, they're independent. They can do what they want,
Yeah,
and he can say, this is my final.
It's his legacy, though.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
think he might feel protected by his legacy.
Yeah.
The last thing I heard, I was telling you earlier, that I talked to a teacher that said she had to go, required to go for a 4-hour course on a Saturday, all right, to learn about Common Core, and that everybody had to do this. How much is that going to cost our education system?
I don't have a clue.
Does anybody?
A lot of extra professional development.
Has anybody asked the question?
The question's been asked, but we have yet to see any data or an analysis, cost analysis. We have no idea.
We've asked a number of times for a cost analysis.
Sounds like the healthcare exchange all over again.
There are people who call this Obamacare.
Well, they say that Common Core does for education and Obamacare
Well,
for healthcare.
if you control the education system and you control the healthcare system in a country, you control the country.
Along with the money and the energy.
Yes.
And all these other things.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I can see where they're going.
It's also taking teacher time away from their subject. I mean, that's what I always come back to, is when you impose new standards on things, the teacher has to spend time on those standards and, complying with the standards. And that is time away from the subject,
And it's
time away from the
administrative
kids.
burden.
That's right. It's
Right.
an administrative burden.
Before we finish up with time, can we talk about the alternatives?
Sure, please.
Because I think Luna has said many times that we can get out whenever we want without penalty. Will you tell them just a little bit
There's
about
actually a
the-
5-step process that we have to go to get out of the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, and that
5 steps.
5 steps, and the last step is getting permission from the Federal Department of Education.
Yeah, but it's not a federal program.
But it's not a federal program. But we do have some alternatives. We are not just leaving a vacuum.
Right, we have superior standards available from other states that we could make use of. They are available. The other thing is that there is an alternative for the assessments as well. Again, back to Zev Warman, who works for TWF Consulting in San Jose, California, assessments consultants. He said that our current ISAT vendor is more than capable of bringing our ISAT test into alignment with the Common Core standards. that most states turn over anywhere from a third to a quarter of their content every year anyway, to keep it fresh. So there's some budget for that as well, and we don't have to do what SBAC's doing. We
Right.
don't have to have the performance-based items and the open-ended questions, which are manually scored and very costly. We can have if we want them, but that's not necessary. We can meet the requirements without it.
So cheaper.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll tell you, I'd like to get you guys back here again.
Yeah, there's so much to cover.
I know, and you can't do it in 28 minutes, almost impossible. But we'll have you back again, and we'll go through the rest of this, see where we stand.
Okay.
By that time, the legislative session will be over. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening, and hope to see you next week at the same time. If you're up early on Saturday morning, you can catch me from 5 to 8 on the Kevin Miller Show, 580 KIDO, Conservative Talk Radio. And we would like to thank the technicians and the staff from TVC-TV for making this broadcast possible. They are a nonprofit organization, and if you wish to donate, you can do so by going to their website, www.tvctvonline.org. Good night, Idaho.